Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in the early hours of 24 February, with its troops advancing from three main directions: Crimea in the south, which Russia annexed in 2014, the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in the east, where Russian-backed separatists already controlled large areas of territory, Belarus in the north, where Russian forces were taking part in joint military training exercises. In the north, Russian forces are attempting to encircle and cut off the capital, but large areas around the city remain under Ukrainian control, especially in the south. Ukrainian generals in the city have their focus on keeping Russian artillery out of range of the city center. The main advance from the north has come down the west side of the Dnieper River via Chernobyl, but those troops have had serious logistical problems, with many vehicles running out of fuel, and have faced strong Ukrainian resistance along the way. The closest Russian troops to the northwest of Kiev are in the suburbs of Bucha and Irpin, about 25 kilometers from the city center, but they have failed to cross the Irpin River so far. That river and others across the city, as well as difficult terrain like marshlands and bogs, have helped Ukrainian forces slow Russian advances so far. A Russian advance from the east has stalled around the suburb of Brovary, about 20 kilometers away from the center of Kiev. However, in the south, Russian forces have made rapid gains across the country, pushing east and west from Crimea. In the southeast, civilians remain trapped in Mariupol, a port city of about 500,000 people, which is encircled by Russian forces and has come under heavy fire. So far, Ukrainian forces have managed to fend off Russian attempts on the ground to capture the city. Elsewhere in the south, Russian advances on Mykolaiv in the west have slowed. Taking the city is key for the Russians to push further west towards Odessa. Russian naval forces off the coast of Odessa have conducted some shelling of the city in recent days, but an amphibious landing would be very difficult and a sign of Russian desperation. Odessa is strategically important for Russia, as it would cut off Ukraine's access to the Black Sea. In the east, fighting continues in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, where Russian-backed separatists held significant territory before the Russian invasion. Mercenaries from the secretive Wagner organization and fighters from Chechnya are believed to be supporting Russian forces in different parts of the country. In the northeast, Russian troops have almost surrounded the city of Sumy, bombed vital infrastructure, and cut off supply routes. But Ukrainian forces are reported to have prevented attempts to cut it off from the south. A similar attempt to encircle Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, has been less successful, with analysts suggesting Russian forces there are in short supply of ammunition. Artillery attacks on residential areas of Kharkiv are being investigated by United Nations, UN, prosecutors for possible war crimes. Of all the surprises that President Vladimir Putin has encountered since invading Ukraine last month, perhaps the biggest has been that Russia is yet to gain air superiority. On paper, Russia's military prowess would have suggested they would be able to take control of the skies. Going into the conflict, Russia had 1,391 aircraft and Ukraine had a total of 132 aircraft. So this theory seems reasonable at first glance. Russia is yet to gain aerial dominance that would give it the ability to crush Ukraine. Russia's defense budget of $45.8 billion is 10 times more than its neighbor. Experts ranging from former Air Force personnel to government officials believe that Russia's failure comes down to a combination of poor preparation by Moscow, a clever use of resources based on intelligence by Ukraine, and the targeted donations of arms from Western allies to Ukraine. General Riho Teres, a former commander of the Estonian Defense Forces, says, "As far as I understand, they were able to save a large part of their air force by moving planes from airfields before the Russians destroyed them, based on intelligence ahead of attacks." Sophie Antrovis, the research associate at Freeman Air and Space Institute and former officer in the UK Royal Air Force, agrees that in the early stages of the war, Ukraine appeared to take intelligence steps that are now paying dividends. They've been clever in that they didn't deploy all of their resources that could take down Russian aircraft. This possibly led Russia into a false sense of security, and Ukraine has been able to keep defending its air while reinforcements from allies arrive, she says. Those reinforcements include S-300 anti-aircraft systems, Stingers and Javelin missiles that have been used by Ukraine so far. The presence of such missile systems marks a dramatic upgrade for Ukraine. Representative Mike McCall, The ranking member on the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee said that S-300s, which are Russian-made, have higher altitude capability than Stinger missiles, which the U.S. has also sent to Ukraine. The S-300s are the high-altitude, sort of like our Patriot battery of missiles, anti-aircraft system. The fact that they are in-country and more are coming is going to be very effective. While these missile systems might be effective, there is still a question mark over how long Ukraine can hold off Russia, both in the air and on the ground. It seems like Russia's larger military and the lack of NATO are the biggest factors in why there is no intervention or a no-fly zone. Ukraine is likely going to grow more reliant on allies for help as the war continues. How long it lasts depends in part on how much Putin is willing to throw at winning the conflict, and whether he wants to repeat the tactics used by Russian forces in support of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad against rebels in his country's civil war. Antrobus says, is he willing to emulate Aleppo and commit atrocities so visible to the rest of the world? The worst days of the war in Syria came years into the conflict, and sadly, people were just paying less attention. This conflict is only 3 weeks old, she says. If Putin were willing to go to the extremes seen in Syria, Antrobus points out, it would come with a much higher risk to Russia because of the anti-aircraft weaponry Ukraine has and is being supplied with. Russia must consider its medium-long term, she points out. How much in terms of equipment and personnel are they willing to lose at the cost of other interests? Placing his own fighters in that level of danger and burning through Russian resources while doing so will be very hard to justify, she says. What would be a tolerable and sustainable loss to control Ukraine's skies is also an unknown. Justin Bronk, Air Power and Technology Research Fellow at the London-based Royal United Services Institute, doesn't believe that Russia can attain meaningful air superiority over most of the country without taking unsustainable losses. There has been little evidence shown that the Russian Air Force is capable of the large-scale, complex air operations that this task would require, he says. Russia's battle for Ukraine's skies is in some respects also reliant on what parts of the ground it controls. Taras says that as long as Russia is still launching most of its attacks from outside of Ukraine, they are limited in how much of Ukraine's enormous airspace they can realistically dominate. With this, Russia has had to resort to bombing targets within Ukrainian borders with missiles launched from outside their borders. Taras adds that Ukrainian forces have so far been wise in selecting which strategic parts of the country to defend. The other unknown when it comes to how long this war will last is how long Ukraine's allies can realistically keep providing weapons that the Ukrainian forces are trained to use. Many of the weapons sent, including the S-300s that had arrived in Ukraine as of Wednesday, are from the Soviet era, and it's unknown how readily they can be resupplied. If you gained any information from this video, make sure you subscribe down below and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos.